Britain in the early 50s was a country frozen in anticipation. The war was over, but its shadows still lay on the faces of passers-by and on the brick skeletons of buildings in London, Liverpool, and Coventry. If you think victory brought instant abundance, you are mistaken. Until 1954, a British housewife couldn't simply go out and buy as much sugar, butter, or meat as she wanted. Food rationing remained a harsh reality, a shocking detail of the time. When sweet rationing finally ended in 1953, thousands of children across the country lined up at sweet shops to taste real chocolate without limits for the first time in their lives. But the 1950s weren't just a time of scarcity. It was the decade when the future arrived in British homes. The name of that future was television. Before 1953, a TV was considered a luxury for the few, but the coronation of the young Queen Elizabeth II changed everything. It was the first mass national media event in history. Families pooled their money to buy one tiny black and white set for an entire street, crowding into neighbors' cramped living rooms and, holding their breath, watched the flickering screen through the static. That was the moment modern Britain was born, a nation united around a television screen over a cup of tea. Life was slow and smelled of coal smoke. Every morning, the milkman left glass bottles at the door, and the coalman delivered fuel for fireplaces, which were the only source of heat. But behind this outward calm, change was already brewing. The arrival of the first tub-style washing machines and vacuum cleaners began to free women from grueling domestic drudgery. At the end of the decade, Prime Minister Harold Macmillan famously declared, "Most of our people have never had it so good." Britain was shedding its grey greatcoat and preparing for the brightest leap in its history. If the 50s were a time of recovery, the 60s were a time of explosion. Britain suddenly shed its grey tones and blossomed with all the colours of the rainbow. This was the decade when the youth stopped imitating their parents and created a world of their own. London turned into the centre of the universe, swinging London. On Carnaby Street and King's Road, Mary Quant's first miniskirts appeared, shocking the older generation, but becoming a symbol of new freedom. This was the time when Britain began to set the tone for global culture, from music to fashion. The main engine of change was music. Beatlemania gripped the country and then the world. The Fab Four from Liverpool changed everything, from hair length to the perception of art. But the revolution wasn't just happening in stadiums, it was in every living room. In 1967, Britain launched colour television. BBC Two was the first. It was a true technological shock. People could spend hours watching a Wimbledon broadcast simply because the grass on the screen was bright green instead of grey. In middle-class garages, another icon of the era appeared. The Mini. Small, economical, yet incredibly stylish. It blurred social boundaries. Everyone drove it, from ordinary workers to Princess Margaret. Inside homes, everything was changing too. Heavy oak wardrobes were replaced by lightweight plastic and plywood furniture, and the first gas ovens with timers appeared in kitchens. Britain in the 60s was saturated with optimism and the belief that progress would make everyone's life easy and infinitely interesting. It was the decade of love that forever changed the country's DNA. If the 60s were a vibrant party, the 70s were Britain's hangover. It was a decade of incredible contrasts. On one hand, there was wild fashion, glam rock, and disco balls. On the other, empty shop shelves and regular power cuts. Due to miners' strikes and the energy crisis, the government introduced the 3-day week, where businesses were only allowed to operate for 3 days to save energy. Britons grew accustomed to spending evenings by candlelight and TV broadcasts cut off at exactly 10:30 p.m. Yet, even in this darkness, there was a sense of coziness. Families gathered around fireplaces, listening to the radio and playing board games. In daily life, the 70s were the era of the plastic boom. Homes were filled with vibrant orange, brown, and green colors. The first microwave ovens and cassette recorders appeared, allowing people to record music directly from the radio, the height of technology at the time. However, as we know, this comfort hid hidden threats, from flammable nylon to asbestos panels. But people didn't think about the danger. They enjoyed the new era of consumerism. On the streets, punk rock emerged. The Sex Pistols and their rebellious spirit were the response to economic decline, expressing the feelings of a youth with no future. The 70s were when Britain began transforming from an industrial powerhouse into a modern, multicultural society. The first Indian restaurants appeared on every high street, eventually becoming a national British tradition. Despite the garbage strikes and the winter of discontent, it was a time of incredible creativity. Britain in the 70s was a country learning to survive in a crisis without losing its sense of humor or passion for self-expression. This decade left behind the most eclectic memories, from platform boots to candlelight dinners caused by power shortages. If the 70s were a time of collective survival, the 80s became a decade of individual success and drastic change. With Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, coming to power, Britain began to change rapidly. Old factories and mines in the north closed, giving way to the shiny glass offices of the City of London. This was the time of the yuppies, ambitious young professionals in power suits clutching the first mobile phones, which were the size of bricks. Wealth and status became the new gods, and consumption the national religion. But the real revolution happened inside the home once again. The 80s were the era of VHS and video rental shops. For the first time in history, Britons didn't have to follow a TV schedule. They could rent a movie on a cassette and watch it whenever they wanted. The Friday trip to the video shop became a sacred family ritual. At the same time, the screens of the first home computers, the ZX Spectrum and Commodore 64, began to flicker in teenagers' bedrooms. Games on cassettes, which took 10 minutes to load while making strange screeching noises, were Britain's first step into the digital age. Culturally, it was a time of stadium rock and bold colors. The wedding of Prince Charles and Diana in 1981 drew 750 million viewers worldwide, returning a fairy tale sparkle to the British monarchy. But behind this facade lay tension, protests, football hooliganism, and music videos on MTV that dictated the fashion for neon leg warmers and big hair. The 80s transformed Britain from a tired industrial nation into a modern financial and cultural hub. It was the decade when the world became faster, louder, and much more technological. Looking at the journey Britain traveled from the 1950s to the 1980s, it is impossible not to be struck by the scale of the transformation. In just 30 years, the country leapt from a black and white world of coal fires, bread rations, and strict Victorian morality into a neon, digital world of personal computers and global capitalism. It was a journey from we to I, from the collective spirit of post-war reconstruction to the triumph of 80s individualism. We have gained incredible comfort and safety. Modern British homes no longer smell of acrid coal. They are free of deadly asbestos, and connection with the world is now instantaneous rather than through weeks of waiting for letters. Technologies that seemed like magic in the 50s, from color TV to home computers, have become commonplace. Life has become cleaner, faster, and undoubtedly easier. But what have we lost? Many Britons who lived through those decades look back with nostalgia at the sense of community. In the 50s and 60s, people knew everyone on their street. They watched the coronation together in one room and shared their last bit of sugar. In the 70s, despite the darkness and strikes, people were closer to each other than ever. Gradually, by closing ourselves off in our flats with VCRs and computers in the 80s, we began to lose that invisible connection. The history of Britain during these 30 years is a story of growing up, from modesty and discipline to freedom and ambition. We look at these old photos not just because we love the retro aesthetic, but because we are looking for answers to the question, who are we today? Each of these decades left its mark on the DNA of modern Britain, reminding us that progress always comes at a price, but the memory of the good old days is what makes us human.